Very good morning to you on this 19th day of September. It is a Friday, the end of work week for many. If you've joined us, you are on the fifth connection, where we make it our end game and continuing game to talk through the storyline of the scriptures. It is written up as a story with many, many different genres. And so this morning we are in the book of Ephesians, and we're going to start out in chapter 4. The beauty of the biblical text in Ephesians is that it is a letter that Paul writes to the assembly. And the assembly is at Ephesus, the believing community, what we would call church. And across the 115 verses of the storyline, Paul is talking about synchronicity in the assembly. What happens when God, the people of God, and events, when they are in sync with who he is and what he is doing. It's a very distinctive entity that God has left as the alternative society, what some would call the urban alternative, the new man, the new humanity. So in the first 3 chapters, Paul unfolds the plan for this assembly. What does that plan, that schema, what does it look like? It has a reality to it that moves toward a destiny with vitality and with novelty. Now in chapter 4, he's going to start off with some very focused attention getters. And the focused attention getters have to do with prompts, what I would call pre-transformation prompts. It's like when you sit at the doctor's surgery. You are waiting and you are waiting and waiting for the doctor to call you. And there's great anticipation because you are ready because of what you are going through, what you are in, whether it's pain or discomfort, you're ready for what he's going to prescribe. Or you are in the waiting room just before you go into surgery, and so you're being prepped. And you get that injection or you take those 2 pills. And before you know it, you wake up outside of the surgery, having gone through the procedures that have been performed. Here, Paul in chapter 4 is going to talk about the real value in cruciform transformation. What is the real value in transformation that is cross-shaped? And the pun is intended. Because when you talk about cross-shaped transformation in the context of the way, in the context of the script which we call the Bible, then you talk about 2 very distinctive things. The one is death, and the other one is resurrection. The one is dying, and the other one is rising. Now, that is so important to keep in your mind, because many in the Islamic world would say that people in the West are afraid of dying. And those of the Islamic persuasion would say, we're willing to give our life, we're willing to die to get into this very sensual Jannah, right? This very sensual place called heaven, with unrestrained sexual pleasure and the like. And so we need to be very, very deeply aware that at the heart of the message, which is Christian, which is about the way, is dying and rising. It's in the forefront. God promises us a lot more than a place where there's unrestrained sexual pleasure, especially for males. Because God promises things coming together in a new Eden, where heaven and earth come together, find their total consummation in the new garden of God. And so it's important to keep in mind uh, this whole idea of storyline hermeneutics, what I call storyline sense making, because stories give us context. They give us the frames within which to understand what is unfolding at the heart of this thing called story. We must stop coming to the biblical text as surgeons, waiting to cut up and dissect every single thing that we see, but rather to come to the biblical text as storytellers, story listeners, people given to an unfolding story, because stories are about the flow of reality, and our brains are given to that. The left hemisphere of our brain and the right hemisphere works according to how stories work. The right hemisphere pans out, gives us context, while the left hemisphere zooms in and goes after details, goes after specificity, goes after high articulation. So let's look at this transformation picture that unfolds in chapter 4. It goes from the worm to the cocoon to the butterfly. Worm, cocoon, butterfly. That's a very graphic transformation picture, which many of us are familiar with. So let's look at the biblical text in terms of what it says here in chapter 4. The text starts out in verse number 1, and it says, therefore. Well, the therefore is therefore placed in this position based upon what the first 3 chapters have said. The first 3 chapters are about our position as the assembly in the context in which God has placed us, whether it's in the home, in the workspace, the workplace, or in the marketplace, wherever believers are found. They are, when they are gathered, the corporate assembly of God, together with every assembly that assembles on the planet. It's what is commonly called the visible church and the invisible church. Well, the visible church is the invisible church in one and the same breath. We are part of a whole. We are the whole, which has many parts. And so the first 3 chapters are what informs what Paul is going to unpack in verse number 1. And in the first 12 verses of this unfolding chapter, he's going to talk about a tall ordered hierarchy, a hierarchy that is rank based on authority. It's what I want to call a broadcast order model, a broadcast order modality in verse 1 to verse 12. He moves from a tall ordered hierarchy in the first 12 verses to verse number 7, where he's going to talk about what that broadcast modality looks like. And then starting in verse number 13, he's going to move from a tall ordered hierarchy to a flat disordered ecology based on mutuality or reciprocity. A flat disordered ecology, because you see, relationships are messy. I don't know if you would agree with that. You may not agree. Relationships are messy things. They're like the worms that crawl out of the box or the can. That's why marriage is messy. The work environment becomes messy because there are relationships that constantly need servicing. Constantly. If you don't like a mess, then you will not like relationships. But if you are given to living with people, you will understand this image. This transformation process moves from a tall, ordered hierarchy to a flat, disordered ecology, an environment where people and life and living happens in a mesh network ecology where it seems so disorderly, but in the midst of this disorder, there is something is happening, something unique is happening because human beings are relating one to another. And then from verse 7 all the way to the end of the chapter, there is a lived, reordered morphology. So he goes from an ordered hierarchy to a flat, disordered ecology into a lived, reordered morphology. And that is the flow of the chapter, this section of the story. So we're going to move very slowly because you must get used to the terminology that I'm using. It moves from a tall order to a flat order to a reorder, a reordered entity, a high ordered hierarchy to a flat ordered ecology to a reordered morphology. This body is morphing. And that's why if the body is dead, there's no life to it. People will be dead. But this is a live entity. It bristles with the life of the risen Lord. And so in verse 1, Paul starts out and he says so clearly, verse 1 to verse 6, that based upon the plan for the assembly in the first 3 chapters, there are 7 postures and pillars of coherence. 7 postures and pillars of coherence that gets this body to hang together. Therefore, he says in verse 1, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. What's the calling? Well, the calling involves embracing your shadow, embracing your limitations, because God can use your limitations to do his best thing. As the Southerners in South Texas would say, we lived there, it was quite fun to hear the Afro-American people talk about God is the only one who can hit a straight blow with a crooked stick. Oh, and God is given to that. He does his best thing at that because he says, with my limitations, Paul says, based on the assembly plan, I urge you to strengthen your bargaining chip with the future in the present time, with 3 empirical evidences, which I'm going to talk about in the very next unfolding line, which is verse 2 of the story. So with our limitations, based upon what God has talked about how this body needs to function, we are urged to strengthen our bargaining chip. What's our bargaining chip? It's the way we conduct our lives as those who are called. We are to walk in a manner worthy of our calling. What's our calling about? What he has challenged us to be and to do. That's what we call axiomatic living. The word axiom comes from the word axios in the Greek text, which means with or worthy. You and I are to walk in a manner worthy of our calling, of the calling to which we have been called. And that's why Paul urges his readers here to strengthen their bargaining chip with the future by living in the present, by living out the evidences that would show that they are called. You cannot get to heaven until you have been gifted with a capacity for it. God gives you capacity to live out heaven on a hellish earth. You see, God's rescue plan for the world, God's rescue plan, incidentally, through Israel for the world, is not about getting us out of here. Many view Christianity as God's escape hatch. In a sense, there's a ring to that, which is true, but the deeper idea is not an escape hatch. God grants us not an escape hatch, but a deeper entry into life and living and experiencing Him. You and I cannot get into living what a heavenly life looks like until we have been gifted with a capacity to posture for it. And that's what he's going to talk about in this chapter. I'm a prisoner of the Lord, but my limitation is okay. I will leverage my limitation to urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. Step up to the plate and strengthen your serve. Strengthen your bargaining chip with the future. Strengthen your bargaining chip with what is called heaven. Because that is what gives you the ability to posture, to live life and navigate the wicked and crooked generation we live in. Nothing short of hell-bent and hell-bound and crooked and perverse. It's in that context God calls you and I, listen carefully, to live our best life. Oh, but you say, no, I want to get out of here. Christianity is not the escape hatch. Christianity gets you to live life head on with all the challenges. Oh, you say this morning that doesn't get me to Jesus jump. Well, it's not meant to get you to Jesus jump. It's meant to get you to live life at the rock face, embracing your shadow, embracing your limitations on this Friday morning. How are you postured to live your best life, your heavenly life in the midst of hell, in the midst of a hellish world? Watch where South Africa is postured politically, nationally and internationally. And then tell me again, are we living in this wonderful world where nothing goes wrong? Nay, nay. You would have to admit that God is the one who presents his people with the challenge. Live your best life in the midst of a crooked and a perverse generation. How are you posturing this morning on your way to work or at work or in your marriage or in your home? Posturing for your best life. And where would you want to live that best life? Well, maybe you'd say in Hawaii or in Mauritius or in Dubai. Well, last time I checked, he wants you to live out your best life in terms of where you are. And so that's what is going to unfold, line by line in this unfolding story, to teach the people of God what real value of cruciform transformation looks like. How that he calls us to transform in the midst of the real world. I trust that as you go into this day, you will enjoy the Lord and look out, be on the lookout for those opportunities where hell comes knocking at your door and doesn't ask you permission, but will toss you the curveball. And oh, life is filled with that, filled with minefields that we need to learn to navigate. I trust that today you'd rise to the challenge and walk with God, and so enjoy your walk with Him. Goodbye for now.